Another area, sixth area of stewardship in our leadership is the aspect of walking in the supernatural. Walking in the supernatural. This is really being a steward of God's power that he does graciously give to human beings. Acts 1:8 says this. Jesus said this to his disciples just before he left the earth. You will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes on you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem, in all Judea and Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. Now, of course, that's a description about how we need to be involved in missions in a lot of different dimensions, but the lead into it is the only way you're going to be able to do it is you're going to receive power. It's not just, hey, go out there and blab. I'm going to come upon you in power, and you need to use that supernatural power, steward it for sharing my word locally and nearby and beyond that. I come from a religious backdrop which did not believe in the power of God. It was either the fact it was just absent, or it was more the idea that it really wasn't for today. It was something the early disciples did, and they saw a lot of things happen, a lot of powerful things, but that was then, this is now, and we kind of hope, but it doesn't really happen that way. And then I remember ending up in a nation around the world where I found myself convicted of a deep bondage in my life, and I actually had a satanic deliverance from a satanic deal, where actually my being, my arms and hands contorted, and an individual actually prayed for a deliverance in my life, and supernaturally I was set free that day from a particular bondage. And I remember getting back on a bicycle and riding back to where I was living, feeling in some ways free for the first time in my life. And it convinced me there is a supernatural element that's out there that, especially in the Western world, we tend to play down, and we've lost a little bit of. Now, there's some churches and some groups that do emphasize it, but I remember just realizing myself, I've had this bias, or I've had this, hey, that stuff's not going to happen today, and and even theologically, it's not going to happen. And then God kind of broke my paradigm a little bit by revealing certain things to me. And with that eventually came the gift of tongues, which I operate in my own life, and again, very supernatural thing. I actually have a friend who was actually using the gift of tongues in the nation of China in a village there, and when she began to speak in a tongue, kind of a heavenly language, or what she thought was a heavenly language, a person in the crowd walked up who could understand what she was saying, just like on the day of the book of Acts. So whatever God did then, he still does today. I've seen people healed. In fact, I remember one time praying for a person for healing, in which when they turned to me and then said, the pain is instantly gone, I remember I was unbelieving. I thought, oh, really? It was kind of like, it did? kind of a thing, You step out in faith and you pray, and then you show your great faith by God does something, but you're even wondering yourself. Interesting thing. I've also been in many circumstances where I felt the gift of God's faith come upon me. And especially when I'm in certain countries, this happens to me a lot of times when I'm in Asia, certain countries where there's a lot of supernatural phenomena. I've been in many situations where people have asked me to pray for them, and words of knowledge have been given. Things come into my mind that I could not know. I simply step out in faith, and I'm praying for an individual, and all of a sudden, boom, this, that. Things just come to your mind that only the Spirit of God knows. And those things are simply used to let a person know that God is real and they've been blessed, or they start crying, or those kinds of things. I've also had that in reverse to me too. I've had a number of people speak into my life where they read my mail, so to speak, because God showed them certain things that only he knew, and he gave to them by his power. And the point here is this. We all need more of God's power. And in some of our Christian settings, we've kind of de-emphasized that. And maybe we can learn from some others. And it's not a matter of power for power's sake, because the book of Acts says, that the one sorcerer said, hey, give me this power. I want to have it too. You can have wrong ambitions for wanting to use power, and that's called pride. But on the other hand, if we want to be effective in ministry, we should be asking God, Lord, your word says they shall lay hands on the sick. Your word says they will speak in tongues. Your word says they'll many things. In fact, greater things they'll do, because you go to the Father. So are we at least pressing in to say, Lord, how can we be vessels, stewards of your wonderful, supernatural power? A great area to learn in, and a great area to be humble in as well, because power's not an easy thing to handle, but God gives it to the humble, and He wants us to use it. And in all of our training schools around the world, one of the biggest things happening in this particular day in the 21st century is a lot of our teens and our kids, they just go out with tremendous faith and they pray for people and they get healed. It's incredible. That's because they're just believing in being a good steward of God's supernatural power. Number 7, another area of stewardship, this one relates to the mind, is the aspect of prayer. Being a steward in the area of our prayer lives. Prayer really is stewardship of your thoughts when you get right down to it. It's stewardship of your inner being. In other words, do you use a good portion of your inner being and your inner thoughts to be talking to the one who knows it all and who has all power and that can link you in to being a conduit of that power and revelation in the lives of other people? One of the most convicting quotes on prayer that I've ever heard is this one by a famous preacher. His name is Robert Murray McCheyne. Robert Murray McCheyne. He said many years ago, about 150 years ago actually, he said, "What a man is on his knees before God, that's what he is, nothing more." Let's just make that genderless. What a person is on their knees, in other words, what they are in prayer, that's what they are. Nothing more. What he's really saying there is your prayer life is the barometer of how spiritual you are. Because it's the closest dimension to God, and it's also the hardest thing to do. So if you want to measure your own prayer life by how spiritual you really are, I mean, we all can put on smiles, and we all can appear spiritual and say the right things, but the true measure of your spirituality is how closely you walk with God. How close is the prayer walk? What a person is on their knees before God, that's the truest measure. That's the greatest glimpse as to whether and I've actually never met a strong Christian who wasn't strong in prayer. But I've met a lot of weak Christians who pray very little. So the two seem to go hand in hand. When I have a strong Christian life, then prayer becomes a big and important part of it. Even, for example, giving God first place in your day. I know one of the greatest lessons that I was taught years ago in my early walk was to begin the day with God, to have a daily quiet time, to get up and not even go to the coffee first. Well, maybe you need that, or in my case, the orange juice. But then going to God first, giving Him time, reading His Word, talking to Him. That's been a habit of my life for decades now, of giving God priority time. And it's really been a tremendous strength to my life. The actual principle in the Bible, if you want to look at it in the lives of great people like David and Daniel and so forth, is not even kind of having one quiet time or prayer time a day, but actually having 3. That's actually the biblical norm. David, evening, morning, at noon, I'll cry and pray aloud. He will hear my voice. Daniel, the habit of going to his upper room, getting down on his knees 3 times a day, the Bible says. I don't have references on this. But he got down on his knees 3 times a day, as was his daily habit. He was the equivalent of the prime minister of a nation, but he still had time to go to his prayer closet 3 times a day and pray. He also received tremendous revelations, as a result of that. So daily prayer, even seasons of prayer. I've tried to kind of build into my life a morning prayer time, and then a little bit of prayer or Bible reading in the middle of the day, and then when you have a family, you have prayer times in the evening or with your wife, or I like to kind of pray before I go to bed. So again, it's the aspect of just being in communion with God. And of course, the bottom line in prayer is pray without ceasing. It's the aspect of you not only have special times and seasons where it's more quality and you're listening, but you're just kind of talking to God all the time. And again, that's stewardship of your words. I mean, think of the world we live in today where words are coming at us, they're bombarding us from the standpoint of iPods and the internet and radio and television. There's just a proliferation of words everywhere. You got to learn to tune a lot of it out. Turn off the radio. Use some good Christian resources or whatever. We need to talk to God more. We need to listen to God more. And all these words that are coming from human beings, they have a place, but in some ways they can knock out the voice of God. So how are you stewarding your life of prayer? Is God a priority in your day? Are there seasons you have with Him that are special? Are you learning to talk to Him? I think all throughout our lives, our prayer life should be getting bigger and fuller, and in that sense, more intimate, because we get more acquainted with God over a lifetime. Colossians 4:2 says, Devote yourselves to prayer, keeping alert in it with an attitude of thanksgiving. And that introduces us to quality number 8. The 8th aspect of stewardship is the action of gratefulness or thankfulness. Yes, that is an attitude, but it's something we've got to show in an outward action. And to me, gratefulness or thankfulness is stewardship of your emotions. It's not always focusing on your half-full cup. We all can do that, right? We all can be Eeyore. We all can lament our circumstances. We all can say, woe is me, and look at all the problems that we have. I mean, whenever I'm with a person like Millie Nelkamp, for example, and I'm looking at her problems, it's actually a matter of how you make comparisons, the good way to make comparisons. One of my dad's favorite sayings used to be, I cried because I had no shoes until I saw a man who had no feet. It's how you make the comparisons. Putting yourself under the woe is me, he's got more than me, or learning to look at life through the window of your blessings and the fact that, especially those of us who live in the Western world and all that we have, could we ever think for one moment, we aren't incredibly blessed? And yeah, that's an inner attitude, but it's got to come out of our lips. Thanks, gratefulness, praise to him. And the Bible's filled with that. And in Colossians 3, verses 15 to 17, we find these words. Let the peace of Christ keep you in tune with each other, in step with each other. None of this going off and doing your own thing. This is the Message translation. And cultivate thankfulness. Let the word of Christ, the message, have the run of the house. Give it plenty of room in your lives. Instruct, direct one another using common sense. Sing your hearts out to God. Let every detail of your lives, words, actions, whatever, be done in the name of the Master Jesus, thanking God the Father every step of the way. Yes, thankfulness and gratefulness is an inner attitude, but it's got to come out. It's got to be expressed in thanks, praise, gratefulness. Looking at our lives from the standpoint of the incredible blessings we have, whether we live to be 20 or whether we live to be 90, and just the blessings of life itself. There are millions of people in our world that don't even get born because of abortion and many other things, let alone all the struggles and problems that people have. So let's fill the world with gratefulness, thankfulness, praise, as again, being a good steward of our inner lives and our emotions in that sense. So my conclusion is this. I do have a kind of a favorite writer in the area of prayer. Some of you have read, I'm sure, some of his books. His name is E.M. Bounds, and he has a whole bunch of books on the subject of prayer. A number of years ago, I took a couple phrases from his writings, and I combined 2 of his sentences with 2 sentences of my own. So what I'm giving you today is Bounds and Bamey. Bounds and Bamey, all right? And it's this. When you get down to servant leadership and stewardship of our actions, it really boils down to this. The church is looking for better methods. God is looking for better men. Let that one sink in. The church is looking for better methods. God is looking for better men and women. Let's make it broad. God is more interested in our character than in our campaigns. Another great sentence. God is more interested in our character than in our campaigns. Why? Because we reproduce what we are. We can't give what we don't live. Now that's the secret to biblical leadership and servanthood and stewardship. The church is looking for better methods. God is looking for better men and women. God is more interested in our character than in our campaigns because we reproduce what we are. We can't give what we don't live. So the bottom line is God has placed people in our lives. Let's serve them, with the attitudes He's given to us. He's also given us resources, things, time, opportunities, jobs, gifts, all kinds of things. Let's be good stewards of those in all of our actions. Let's wake up every day and say, Lord, wow, another day of grace. I'm thankful to be alive. How can I serve you? How can I serve others? And how can I be a good steward of what you've given to me? If we will live that way, then eventually God can say to us, well done, good and faithful superstar. No, well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful with a little. Enter into the joy and rest of your master.